Time to start reassembling the body. And so I'll start with the film advanced parts. So here I'm using graphite grease. Making sure I get it down between the bush and the shaft. Some to the spring. That's nice and free, that's good. I'll use some synthetic grease here on the cam surfaces here, the ratchet teeth of these surfaces. And I'll do the outside surface too. That'll do. Take the spool. Unlike the earlier retinas, the spool doesn't have a metal insert in the base. Now, to get sufficient tension on the return spring, instead of starting it at this position, where am I? I'll start it here. Three screws. You can distinguish them from the ones that hold the chrome trim on the base plate because they may have a bit of grease on them before they've been cleaned, but they haven't got any glue. That's good. Now, here's the catch for the rewind button. It needs to go in next. I'll lubricate the end of that with a little bit of molybdenum. Put the spring in place. Get it screwed down. Tighten that screw. and hook the end of that spring over here. That's good. Next I want to deal with the components at the top of the film advance. And we start with the clutch. 3 pieces to the clutch, and I'm going to use graphite grease to lubricate this. So I'll put a good smear all the way around the inside of the clutch. And I'll find the right tools. The spring only goes on in one position. It has a tab which engages with a notch. I'm gripping that with a pair of pliers and twisted it in so that it's held firmly, and I can put the outer over the top, and I'm checking the action to make sure that it slips smoothly, and it does. So a little of the synthetic grease into the centre. Drop that into position. That should engage with the slots in the top of the film spool, take-up spool. We have the bush. Applying some grease in here, synthetic grease, and again I just force that in. A little bit of hydraulic pressure there will push that into that space. Quick wipe around the inside where it fits around the shaft. Drop that into position. Just rotate the film spool to make sure it's engaging with the gear here correctly. That all looks good. Have a plain screw at this side. I'm not doing that up tight, leaving that slightly loose, because on this model it's awkward getting the shaft, put this bush in place, it's awkward getting the shaft for the rewind, the shaft that runs down to the rewind button, the sprocket shaft. It's difficult getting that in there. The clearance is a bit tight. If you've got it too tight, those screws up, you can find you can't get the thing to fit down smoothly. It's easier to leave it loose, tighten it up once the shaft's in place. Just get that started, hook that spring back over, and that screw down a bit more. Check that that is free. That screw, just back that off slightly, let's leave this loose, and that's all that's required. Now, the gear here needs a bit of lubricant around the inside. It should drop into place. That little ratchet there stops it from revolving in the opposite direction. Now this little piece, fits on here like this. I take that around. There's that little dog that drives it. This can fit on in any of 4 positions, and it doesn't matter which way around it's done. We have this little spring that acts on that dog and pushes it across to keep it engaged. Let's get that into position. That's it. Here's the cover. That drops into place. Now you want a replacement there for that gear that was buggered up. I better find one. Here we have it. I'll hold the shaft with my finger at the bottom to stop it getting away and do that screw up tight. That's it. Now I want to fit the film sprocket and the sprocket shaft and the rewind button. So I'm lubricating the shaft at the top and at the bottom where it runs through the casting. I'll put a bit on the gear teeth for good measure. Put the sprocket shaft in. The slot goes upwards. Drop the shaft down through the body, through the sprocket shaft, and holding the sprocket shaft in with my finger, and flip the catch back out of the way. Now that's up in place. So now I can put a screw in here. That drives the sprocket. Alright, holding that up in position. Got the rewind button, its spring and its washer. So put a little bit of grease around the shaft of that rewind button. That's where it works through the spring. The spring on, the washer, and screw into place. Just checking that that passes up through past the catch correctly. I'll do that up as tight as it needs to be, not as tight as it was last time. That's good. Now I can feel both revolve the sprocket shaft and both will revolve together. You can see here if I hold the sprocket shaft I can pull this back. There's enough slippage there to allow that. Right, so we've got the advanced shaft and the sprocket shaft, rewind button, etc. in place. I can now tighten these two screws up. I'll just check that the rewind will drop there down into place. It does, it engages smoothly. There's a little bit of backlash in the gear at this point, that's good. Doesn't need to be too tight. That's good. That part is done. Next I want to see about putting the components into the base of the camera. Let's get this around here a bit. This return spring for the latch here is inclined to pop up out of position. I'm just pushing that back down. Here's the return spring for the frame counter. Swing that into position. Here's the frame counter. And I'm just put a little bit of lubricant underneath that for good measure. I'll put some at the end where it runs on that cam. Alright, that's good. I'm just checking that fits. That's all good. Now I want to pre-tension the film advance at this stage. I've got virtually no tension on there at the moment. Now there's a little spring that fits down in here that latches the aperture cover at the back. So I've just dropped that into position. I'm just going to rotate this one full turn. See if it will stay for me. It may do. Put my frame counter down into position, the frame counter lever, and I have to hook its return spring into place. That's done. Just checking that I've got everything in there that I need in there. That's good. I've got a base plate here that had the front edge cut out of it. That allows me to fit the base plate and then fit the front. I'll just rotate this to allow that to clear, check that the frame count is engaged, and fit a selection of these screws that hold the base plate on. Because of the tab on the film Advance, it can't rotate and lose its tension once the base plate is in place, unlike on some of the other retinas where it certainly can, and then you have the tedious business of getting it all wound back up into position again. And I'll pop one right down the end there. That's enough for our purposes. We can fit the advance knob, the advance lever, the shutter release comes down through here that releases that. Just checking that that revolves smoothly. It certainly does. Very positive. Alright. Next we can put in some of the components around the body. Just checking to see if there's any reason I shouldn't put the top on straight away. No, I think that's good. So we can pop the chrome trim in place. Here is the bracket. On some of these cameras they have strap lugs. This is early production and it doesn't have a strap lug at either end of the body. So this simply supports the top cover in this case. Here I've got the film rewind shaft. I'll put a little bit of lubricant on this. This is the synthetic grease. You get that spring centered in the recess. That's good. Get this thing in there. That's better. That's in there. 2 screws. You don't want to over tighten those screws because you will just split that plastic if you go crazy. I think that can go in. That's the other support for the top cover. Just nip that up. While we're at that stage, I'll see if I can pop the tripod socket in the base of the camera. First there's the plastic insert that goes in. Then there's the chrome brass piece. Now the screws, two of them are normal countersunk head screws. One of them has a post on it, and that stops the tripod socket surround from being able to twist or rotate on there. Otherwise its load would be taken up by those two tiny screws which hold it in place. They'd very likely shear off just for good luck. That's good. The centre of the rewind shaft I'll fit later because it's inclined to fall out if it's not being held, and it just creates a nuisance, so we'll do that later. What have we got here? Well, that was our damaged gear, of course, which we don't need to see. Okay. So we have this bush that supports the cocking rack at the top. I'll pop that into place. I'll put a bit of lubricant on that. I'll put some synthetic grease on the cocking rack, on the teeth, on the back edge, on the underside, on that top edge. Short one screw here, sitting in another container. Let's see what I've done with it. That's not it. That's not it. Where's that? Alright, time to hunt the screw. Alright, we're ready to go. Now I'm just going to check that action, make sure that I've got that correctly positioned. It looks like it's one tooth over to me, so I'll move that back now. Fit the strap lug. There's a special screw with quite a pronounced shoulder on it here. It acts as a bearing for this bush. Get that down into position. and a normal countersunk head screw goes in here. Now I'm going to check the action. Make sure the rack moves smoothly. I'm watching for any sign of undue clearance at this point, which would suggest that that was going to cause us problems. But that looks snug, that looks just right. I don't think there's any problem there. So the body is largely dealt to. Next, what do I want to do next? Next we can fit the meter drum, get the cord all back in place. Now the cord is woven silk to my understanding. It's extremely strong, and as you know, it breaks occasionally, usually probably where it's been scuffed over or someone's tightened a screw against it or something to cause it to fail. Generally speaking, it's very strong. If it's not showing any signs of stress or wear, I don't replace them. If it is, I would.